Welcome to our 11 o'clock service. It's so good to be with you all as we continue our series called The Art of War. And I don't know about you, if you are one of those people who are like a one passion person or whether you are a multiple passion person. Now, I have had many passions and hobbies throughout the years, especially in late high school when I started doing homeschooling. I was breeding tropical fish. I was not only flying kites, I was building these huge power kites that would like drag you on the beach and stuff before the days of kite surfing. I have had motorbikes that I not only rode, but I fixed them up, and I have been into music my whole life. I've had bands, I've been into songwriting, mountain biking, and in the last couple of years, it's been CrossFit. But here's the one thing that I've realized about myself. When I am into a hobby, I'm like all in. Like I spend my money on it, I spend my time on it, I go all in. And here's the other thing I realized. I'm not just all in, but I'm so all in that I believe everyone in the world needs to know that this will make their life better. So I try to bring everyone along on that journey. And that is not just me. That is a human thing. When we are truly passionate about something, when we truly believe in something, we don't just enjoy doing that thing, but we feel this need to advance our cause, to bring other people along on this journey. You can speak to an introvert who's a person of very few words, and if you say these magical words, tell me about your passion project. If you get them talking about their passion project, even the most quiet introvert will talk your ear off. It is incredible how passionate we can be about things in our life, not just for ourselves, but to share it with others. And that is what we're going to be talking about today, the need to advance our causes. But let me give you a quick recap first of what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. We're busy with a series called The Art of War. And in the first week, we looked at this reality that Paul, one of the writers of the New Testament, writes about to the church in Ephesus in Ephesians 6. And he tells them there's a reality you have to face. Whether you know it or not, there is a spiritual world around us. And not only is there a spiritual world, but there's a real spiritual enemy, the Bible calls the devil, that is out to destroy your life. And whether you believe it or not, as Aragorn told Theoden in Lord of the Rings, war is upon you whether you would risk it or not. So Paul says the day of evil will come to us all, a day when we face some kind of spiritual attack in our lives. And therefore, he tells us, you need to be ready and you need to have the right armor and the right weapons if you want to remain standing. And that is what we're busy talking about in this series. It's not only the reality of the spiritual world, but how do we remain standing when a day of evil, when a day of spiritual attack crosses our path. And today, as I already said, our topic is constantly advance forward. Constantly advance forward. If you have done any kind of sport, one of the sports that I've done as well that I was passionate about for a very short amount of time was boxing. But there's some really big guys who like to box. And even if they say, oh, this is a friendly spar, they just beat you up. So it's like, it didn't last very long. I was passionate about it for a while, but not a long time. But whether it is boxing or rugby that I grew up with, or probably hockey, I'm guessing, you cannot just stay where you are. You have to advance forward or you will lose ground and at the end of the day, lose the fight. So today our topic is constantly advance forward, and we'll be reading from Ephesians 6. If you've got your Bible so you can open there, it's also going to be on the screen. And we read in the first week the part about the reality of the spiritual world. And now we're going to continue again when we started the second week with how do we equip ourselves for the spiritual war. And we'll add today's piece of armor that Paul writes about into the list. So Ephesians 6, verse 13 to 15. Paul writes, because there's a spiritual reality, he says, therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, not if it comes, when it comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. Stand firm then. How? How do we stand firm? With the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and our piece of armor for today, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. Now, if we read this, let me give you a bit of background first on the armor. Alexander the Great conquered a lot of the known world back in his day, about 333 before Christ. And one of the things that made his armies so successful, like just taking this known world for itself, was, guess what? Their shoes. Even historians like Josephus said the success of the army, a large part of it was dependent upon their shoes with hobnails underneath. So it's kind of like spikes that you would have on athletic shoes today. It gave the Roman army the ability to stand their ground, to dig their feet into the soil and not be moved by other armies. But not only did it give them the ability to stand their ground, it also gave them the ability to travel for many, many, many kilometers and take ground for the Roman Empire. And if you go and read on this one verse about the armor of God in commentaries, what theologians, what scholars write about it, you always read one of these two things. And there's a little bit of confusion about what exactly Paul meant because it's a very tricky sentence in Greek. But on the one hand side, some theologians say, no, this is about really standing our ground as Christians in the gospel of Jesus. And others says, no, this is about advancing the mission of Jesus in the world. And here is something that I've learned. When good Christian people who really study the Bible and is passionate about God get to this point where they see two different things in the same text and they cannot get to a conclusion, often it's because both of those things tend to be true. And I'm going to show you today how I believe that when Paul says we should have our feet fitted with the readiness for the gospel, it is both about standing our ground and also advancing forward. So if you are not a Christian, if this is your first time here today and you're still trying to figure out Christianity, I want to tell you this is kind of like a family conversation, this one today, where you sit around the table in your kitchen and you talk about things that we need to sort out with each other. But I hope that in this conversation as well, that you would hear why Christians are passionate about their faith. And if you have met Christians that are not passionate about their faith, I want to apologize because they do not represent, I believe, what the Bible teaches us. But if you have met people who's passionate and you're like, wow, they're so passionate about it, this is why. So I hope it will give you a bit of a glimpse into who we are and why we are this way. The first thing is this concept of standing our ground that I want to share with you. The reality is, all of us here have something in common. And that is that at one point in our lives, and that point might still be a reality for you right now, but at one point of our lives, we all had a time when we were broken. A time when we felt hopeless, a time when we felt confused, a time when we didn't know where to turn for hope, a time when we were uncertain about the future, and not only tomorrow, but what would happen after this life. A time when we were stuck in sin, and sin is anything that damages the relationships between you and the people around you, people that were created in the image of God, and between you and your Creator. And there was a time when we are all stuck in that. But the gospel of peace, the word gospel comes from the Greek word evangelion, which means good news. The good news of Jesus is that He came to set us free from all of our brokenness and our sin. That He came to give us peace. That He came to give us hope that transcends all logic and reason and understanding. That He came to fill our lives with joy. And that is the good news of the gospel of peace. But I do believe that Christians in the Western world face a challenge that I would call familiarity fatigue. This happens in marriages as well. I've been married now 14 years. And what often happens with people, the longer they are married, the more they go into a maintenance mode, especially if you have little children. Your life starts revolving around getting kids ready for school or getting them to sport and preparing meals and getting the house clean and cutting the lawn and your lawn lines and whatever it might be. And you go into this mode where your relationship is all about maintenance and not about that spark anymore that brought you together. That's familiarity fatigue. And sadly, we do the same thing with God, especially if maybe like me, I grew up as a pastor's kid. I come from generations of pastors. I've known Jesus my entire life. And it is so easy to forget what the gospel changed, the good news of Jesus changed in our life. It's so easy to forget how significantly it changed who you were. And that is the problem of familiarity fatigue, where we just grow so familiar with it that we lose that spark that the gospel should have ignited in us. And that is the first thing I want to tell you today, is that the gospel of Jesus should fill us with awe and passion every day. If it doesn't fill you with awe and passion, you have fallen into a trap of familiarity fatigue. You've lost your awe of the beauty and the transformation that comes with it. And that doesn't happen by accident. I believe that is an attack by our enemy, by the Satan, because he hates the gospel. When Jesus died on the cross and he conquered death, when he was resurrected, and he conquered sin, he also conquered our enemy, the Satan. We're not his anymore. He doesn't have free reign over us anymore. We're not trapped by our brokenness and our sin and all of our confusions anymore. So he hates the gospel, and he will do everything he can to try to get you to grow so familiar with it that you don't care about it anymore. He will try to get you to turn away from it. And Paul, to one of the other churches, he writes in Galatians 1 verse 6 to 8, and he tells them, I am so shocked in you guys. You can go and read it yourself. But he says, you found this hope, this peace, this joy, this beauty in the gospel, the good news of Jesus. And I cannot figure out how you just turned away from it. Have you got so familiar with it that you just developed a fatigue for it? And he says, and now you are busy messing around with all of these other gospels. Because remember, the word gospel isn't a Jesus-only word. It's a Greek word, evangelion, that means good news. So it says, so instead of this good news of Jesus that truly transforms everything, you've started messing around with other good newses. I don't know if that's a word. The good news of the big towers of money that we build for ourselves. The good news of medical systems that can cure us from everything, which they can't. The good news of power. The good news of consumerism that will bring you happiness if you just have the right stuff. He says you're falling for all of these lesser things. It's like, and I don't get how you have given up on the beauty of the good news of Jesus. He said there is no other truly good news. There is no other true gospel. There are good things in this world, but not good to the extent where it will completely transform every aspect of who we are. And that is the beauty of the gospel of Jesus. If we truly understand it, if we truly live in it, if we've truly been set free by it, it brings us sure footing. It anchors us in a position in life where we don't fall for every lie that comes our way, where we don't fall for everything that tells us it's good news and it will transform our lives. We are rooted in a way where we stand in the good news of Jesus and we cannot be moved by it. Paul calls that a mature Christian, where I don't flip-flop with the waves of this life. We don't have to lose ground if we know the gospel to every thought that pops up in my head. It anchors us. So when he says, put on the shoes of readiness of the gospel of peace, he's saying, like, be so rooted in the gospel of Jesus that nothing moves you away from it. That you don't grow so familiar with it that you get fatigued by it. But then the second part of this, and I want to go back to the hobbies that I spoke about at the beginning. When I'm truly passionate about something, not only do I enjoy doing it, but I want to take everyone along on that ride with me. So when I truly understand the gospel of Jesus, when it truly transforms my life, not only do I want to stand in that truth and live in that truth that transforms everything, but I start to feel this need to go out with it and share it with other people. And that is the second aspect of the shoes. The gospel of peace has an effect on us which not only transforms us, but which sends us out. And what I want to warn you of today is that we cannot give to others what we don't possess ourselves. I cannot convince you, for example, that CrossFit would make your life better, that you would grow old better, that you would have the strength to pick up your grandkids when you're old, unless I have experienced some of the changes myself. I cannot convince you of anything if I do not possess it myself. And that is when deserting starts happening. You see, a soldier doesn't desert his post if he believes in that position. And this is the sad reality to me, is that often as Christians, we act like deserters. We act like we're fighting for a king that wants dominion over more land, but I'm not fighting for my freedom or anything that's really significant. But you see, for the gospel, I am not going out because it's just a king who wants a land grab. I am fighting for true freedom, not just for myself, but for my family and for the people around me. I'm fighting for hope. That's what I'm standing for. And when you truly believe in what you're fighting for, you cannot desert your post. It's when you lose that ability, when you don't know what you're fighting for, where you become a deserter. A soldier who believes in what he's fighting for will not only just remain standing, but he will continue to advance. Because if he doesn't advance, if he stays in the same place for too long, he will die. And that is true whether you are a soldier in a time of spears and swords, or whether you are a soldier in the time of modern warfare where it's drones and missiles. If you stay in the same place for too long, you're going to die. And I believe that is a problem, and this is where my table talk comes in that I warned you about at the beginning. I believe that the church in Canada has been standing still for way too long. Being so comfortable with what they have found in the gospel to the point where it has brought fatigue to the church. And you might be like, Louis, how could you say that? One, I'm an outside observer. So I see it. But two, the stats do not lie. And we know how Christianity has been shrinking and declining and dying in the Western world. And I want to put some of this on the screen for you. I've got stats there from our previous 3 censuses. So 2001, 2011, 2021. The first circle there represents 23 years ago. That's not that long ago. And this was a question about religious association, a Christian religious association. So this could be anyone who views themselves as a Christian. And there are some groups that the Christian churches won't even classify as a Christian church, but they view themselves that way. So it's not 100% accurate, but here's still the reality. 23 years ago, 77.1% of people in Canada called themselves Christian. 77.1. More than 3/4. By 2011, that green block shrank to 67.3%, and by 2021 to 53.3%. We are probably now past that halfway mark, less than halfway. Of that green block, a big percentage, I think 26 point something percent are Roman Catholics. If you're talking about the rest, which should probably mostly be Protestant Christians that live on the good news of Jesus, the gospel of Jesus, it's 27%. At the same time, while this green block is shrinking, this is what is happening with non-religious associations. We often refer to them as nuns. So they have no religious association. In 2001, it was a tiny little green sliver. Only 16.5% of people in Canada believe that they do not need religion in their life. That grew to in 2011 to 23.9%, and in 2021 to 34.6%. It doubled in 20 years. And this is the reality when you look at all of that. We are living now in a world where only 27%, maximum 27% of people are Protestant Christians, 26.3% are Roman Catholic. The biggest single grouping in Canada are the non-religious at 34.6%. The United Church, which used to be the biggest grouping in Canada, the biggest denomination, is closing churches, they say, at a rate of one church a week. More than 400 churches in the last 10 years. The Catholic Church in rural areas and in Quebec, they say are in peril. They closed 400 churches between 2003 and 2016. The Faith and Common Good Trust and the National Trust for Canada did a study, and this is now already 3 years or something old, where they said 3 years or so ago that in the next 10 years, 9,000 churches and other faith-owned buildings in Canada will be shutting down. And they didn't write it from a good perspective. They said this is leaving Canada with a crisis because all the good things, the social things that happen out of these religious buildings will have no home anymore. It's stopping. And maybe you go like, "Lee, but it's a cultural thing, man. We're living in the West. It's secularization, it's normal. Like, we can't do anything about it." Like, Paul had it easy. The church had it easy. No one ever had it easy. The Jews killed the Christians. Paul, who's writing this letter, was one of the ones who killed Christians before he met Jesus. The Romans killed the Christians. Everywhere you would walk in a city, there were all of these massive buildings, these temples to Zeus and all of these Greek gods. Nothing has changed. People are still worshiping idols. They have just changed from building a building to Zeus to building a building for money or for power or for status or for whatever it might be. We have just swapped from one idol to another. The world is still the same, looking to find purpose and meaning and hope in itself, which we are horrible at. The problem is that the church didn't want to adapt in how we moved forward. We are so comfortable living without the armor of God that we were just open to any spiritual attack, and we didn't have the shoes of readiness on our feet to go out and to respond to the changing times and the devil's tactics. Verse 15 says our feet should be ready. Shouldn't be lazy. They shouldn't be tired. They should be ready. Because so much is at stake. Hear what Paul writes to the church in Rome, in Romans 10, verse 13 to 15. He says, "For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." Who did Jesus die for? Who did God choose? Everyone. Not a handful of people, not people just in Canada or somewhere in South Africa or India. He has died for every person, no matter the color of your skin, the social economic group you are in, the brokenness, the sin that's in your past, how messed up your life might have been. He has died for everyone so that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. But then he says this, and I wish that "but" was just like in bold, big letters, capital letters. But how can they call on him? How can someone call on Jesus to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they have never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? And how will anyone go and tell them without being sent? That is why the scriptures say, "How beautiful are the feet of messengers who bring good news." I want us to go back to that Numbers. And maybe you grew up in the good old days. People always talk about the good old days, right? And maybe this is upsetting to you. Maybe this breaks your heart. Maybe this fills you with an anxiety and you're like, I don't know if there's a future for my children anymore. I don't know if my grandchildren's ever going to know Jesus at the way we're going. That is the way we can feel. But Paul says, people need hope. And he says that the church are like soldiers who've been given shoes to go out. The church has been given a mission, a very specific mission, to be witnesses to God. Jesus said in Matthew 9 that if you look around you, the harvest is great, but the harvesters are few. So I want you to look at that again. And I want you to see today, are we looking at a bad picture of the future, or are we looking at incredible opportunity? Because when I look at that, all I see is this. I see this handful who has the gospel in their lives, who has experienced the transformation of Jesus, who has experienced what it means to have hope in a world that seems hopeless, to have peace in a time when it doesn't make sense. And then I see the rest who still needs to hear that and who's hungry for that. And I think of Jesus, who said it with his last words before he ascended to heaven, go and tell them. Like, tell them there is good news. The world isn't all hopeless anymore. I think of Jesus who said in Matthew 9, pray for more to go out, because there is such a huge harvest in front of you, millions of people, and you don't even have to leave our borders. I don't believe you can call yourself a follower of Christ, but you don't live the mission of Christ. And while we are sitting here, the world is falling apart. And you might be like, man, Louis, that is extreme. The world is falling apart. There is violence all around us. Just open the news. We live in a country where there was very little violence just a couple of years ago. It's in the news. Didn't have to travel to a third world country to read about violence anymore. There is war all around us in the world. Pornography and sex trade that is built on slavery, on people's backs, women and children who do not choose that. We are not living in a world free of slavery. There are more slaves today than before in history because of that. There is drugs everywhere destroying lives of millions of Canadians. People have this identity confusion and they don't know where to go to find answers. Schools are filled with bullying. We've got people coming to the Christian school. They're not even Christian. They just want to get their kids out of a space where they're constantly being bullied. People harm themselves to get rid of some of the emotional hurt that they're carrying with them. Suicide keeps going up. There's fraud everywhere. The list just goes on. And our world is falling apart all around us. And we can complain about it, or we can do something about it. And something about it, trust me, coming from South Africa, is not getting a better president or more police or a bigger army or whatever. It doesn't solve the problems. Because the problem is not just in what people do, the problem is so deeply seated in our souls, where we start thinking of ways to harm others and to do these things that causes hurt. The only way that this country, that this world will be different is if hearts are changed before it even thinks up all of these evil things. And there's only one heart surgeon that can do that. And his name is Jesus. So you can complain about it, or you can do something about it. But the Bible says that someone cannot believe, that they cannot find freedom, that they cannot find hope, that their hearts cannot be transformed unless they believe in Jesus. And Paul says they cannot believe unless they've heard. And no one in the world, except for the church, has been given the commission to tell the world of Jesus. If the church doesn't share the good news of Jesus, no one else will and no one else should, because no one else got that commission. It's ours as the church, as believers in Christ. So if we don't do it, how will people hear? So I want to challenge you, and next time when you think the world is falling apart, to remember that there's only one true hope for peace, and that is Jesus. I want you to remember next time when you're facing a neighbor that is just filling you with so much frustration, someone who's stealing your peace, someone who's creating problems for you, to realize, wow, this is actually someone who needs the peace of Jesus, and to view them with different lenses. I want you to think next time when you wish that someone would just fix something, that you would remember the power of the gospel has been given to us. And the gospel of Jesus has the power to change everything. Satan will try everything to get you off mission. He will try everything to get you to be a deserter, someone who abandons their responsibility, someone who's just comfortable sitting here every Sunday and not doing anything beyond these walls. That's his mission. So put on the shoes that roots you in the gospel of Jesus and moves your feet out. It's time for us to reignite that spark of the gospel in our lives, that we are so passionate about it that we cannot contain it anymore. Here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes now to just sit for a moment and think about it. Are you ready to advance forward? Then I want you to, for a moment, just think and pray about 3 people. And get 3 names. It could be a neighbor, it could be a colleague, it could be a friend, it could be a family member. 3 people that you can start praying for right now and commit to that you will share the good news of Jesus with them. Before we even came to Canada, I started praying and I said, God, give me someone. And He's so faithful. And last year I baptized 2 of my plus ones. Some of the people who were baptized here in the last couple of weeks were some of your plus ones. But it's time for us to not just hope that we will accidentally advance, but to put on the shoes of readiness and to move forward. So let's take some time, just spend some time in prayer and commit 3 people to Jesus now and say, God, I commit to pray for them every day, to build a relationship with them, and to start sharing the good news of Jesus with them. Let's do that now. Jesus, thank you for good news. Good news that brings restoration to brokenness. Good news that brings purpose to purposeless people. Good news that fills us with hope and peace when the circumstances around us seems like it should be hopeless. Good news that restores our relationship with our Creator. Good news, not just for tomorrow, but a good news for eternity. And I pray, Jesus, that we would so vividly grasp how good this news is, that we cannot help but share it everywhere we go. I pray today for every person listening to this, God, that they would be rooted in your gospel, that they would find hope in Jesus. And I pray that you would provide us people and opportunities to share this beautiful mystery of Christ in such a way with them that they can understand it, they can comprehend it, and that it would change their lives. I pray that you will make us uneasy just being bench warmers. And that, like the early church, that we would be known in this community for our love and our kindness and our hospitality and our passion for the King of Kings. Pray in Jesus' name. Amen.